In this video, we're going to start the KutaSoftware Infinite PreAlgebra free worksheet, adding and subtracting integers. In the first section, numbers 1 through 10, we're going to be finding each sum. So let's jump into number 1, plus 7. Now, one way I like to think about this is by drawing a number line. So let's start with that. So I'll take our first starting point, which is negative 12. And then I'll put a couple more points. So here will be negative 11, negative 10, negative 9, and so on. Now, if we're starting at negative 12, we're going to be adding 7 to that. And adding a positive number, we're moving to the right on the number line. When we add a negative number, we move to the left. So as opposed to going to the left of 12 to negative 13, we're going to be going to the right 7 times. So plus 1, plus 2, plus 3, plus 4, plus 5, 6, and then 7. So our solution in number 1 is going to be negative 5. Now I will say drawing a number line every single time is going to get tedious, especially when dealing with larger numbers like negative 20 plus 30. However, let's think about that as owing something to someone. We're starting out in the negatives. We owe 12 of something. So we're in debt. We don't have 12 things. We have negative 12 things. So that's like saying, hey, can you buy this for me and I'll pay you back? So let's say somebody bought something for you for $12. You currently owe them that amount. So you're in the hole, in the negatives. But you don't have all that money to pay them back. You have only $7 on you. So you give them $7. Now that doesn't cover the full $12 they spend, but it gets you a little bit out of that hole. So now, as opposed to owing them $12, if you give them 7, now you only owe them 5. So we're at negative 5. And in number 2, as opposed to adding a positive to a negative, we're going to be adding another negative. So let's take a look at that. For number 2, we have negative 10 plus a negative 7. So again, I'll start out by drawing our number line, but eventually I'm going to leave this up to you if you need it. So here's our number line, and I'll plot a few points. So in this case, we're starting at negative 10, and we're going to be adding negative 7. So starting at negative 10 and adding negative 7, we're not adding a positive, so we're not moving to the right on our number line, but instead we're moving to the left. So we're going to move to the left 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So negative 10 plus a negative 7 is equal to a negative 17. And now let's think about our scenario from before. Before, somebody had bought something for you that was $12, or you owed them $12, and you had $7 on you, so you gave them that money right away. Now think about somebody paying for something, or you owing them $10, but then they buy you something else. So now you owe them not only 10, but you also owe them 7 more. So negative 10 plus a negative 7, we're going further into debt. We're going further into those negatives. So negative 10 plus a negative 7 is going to be a negative 17. Let's continue on to number 3. In number 3, we have negative 6 plus a positive 12. So we're starting in the negatives, but this positive value of 12 is actually greater than 6 in the negative. So we're going to wind up in the positives. It's going to be a positive 6. Because we're starting at negative 6 If we add 6 to that, we'll get to 0, and then add another 6, which in total would be adding 12, gets us to a positive 6. And remember, addition's commutative, so we could write this in a different way. We could write number 3 as 12 plus a negative 6. And remember, negative 6 is moving to the left on the number line, and moving to the left is the same as subtracting. So when we're adding a negative, that's the same as subtracting a positive. So this would be 12 minus 6, and 12 minus 6 gives us 6. So it's just a couple of different ways to look at it. Now, moving on to number 4, a positive plus a positive. We're already to the positive side of that number line, and we're continuing to the right. And 8 plus 7, we know, is 15. Moving on to number 5, 3 plus 4, we know, is 7. We're starting out with a positive 3, and then we're moving 4 more to the right. 3 plus 4, 3 increased by 4 is a positive 7. In number 6, we're starting out in those negatives. So we're starting to the negative side of our number line, but we're adding a positive number, so we're moving to the right. So as opposed to going further in the negatives, we're moving that other direction. So negative 45 plus 9, that's going to be a negative number still, because negative 45 has a greater absolute value than 9 does. The absolute value of negative 45 is a positive 45, and the absolute value of 9 is 9. And we know that 45 is greater than 9, so we know that we're going to have a negative number in the end. That's another way you can look at this. So if we have a greater negative number and we're adding a smaller positive number, we'll still remain in the negatives. Negative 45 plus 9, that's going to leave us with a negative 36. And remember, addition's commutative, we could write this a different way. We could write this as 9 plus negative 45. And 9 plus negative 45 is the same as 9 minus 45. So we're starting with a positive number, and we're taking away a greater value, so we're going to wind up in those negatives. 9 minus 45 is going to be a negative 36. And I'll be honest, sometimes visualizing this is a little difficult, and I like to think of things in the positives and then go to the negatives. So if I have 9 minus 45, I know that's going to be a negative number, but I can just take the negative of the opposite of this. So I'll do 45 minus 9. If I do 45 minus 9, I'll get negative 36, because 45 minus 9 is 36, and a negative 36 is negative 36. And why this works is because think about distributing a negative. Negative 45 plus negative 9, or minus a negative 9, is a positive 9. That's just another way to think about it. This is the same thing we started with. I just rewrote it as this so I could deal with positives and then go to my negative. Let's continue on to number 7. In number 7, we have negative 1 plus negative 46. So we're starting out in the negatives and we're going further into the negatives. So negative 1 plus negative 46 is going to be a negative 47. And again, if you like to think in positives, we have two negative numbers, so we know that the sum of those is definitely going to be negative. So if we just sum 1 and 46, we'll get 47, and we knew that we started with two negatives, so it's still going to be that negative in the end, which is a negative 47. Now in number 8, we have negative 30 plus 10. Remember our trick to figure out if it's negative or positive. The absolute value of this first number, negative 30, is greater than the absolute value of 10, because 30 is greater than 10, so we know that our number is going to be negative. So negative 30 plus 10, we're starting the negatives, but we're moving to the right when we add 10 to that negative 30. So that's going to be a negative 20. And again, you could rearrange this to write it as 10 plus negative 30. And 10 plus negative 30 is the same as 10 plus a negative minus a positive. 10 minus 30. So starting with 10, if we take away 30 from that, well, taking away 10 from 10 would give us 0, and then we'd still have to take away another 20 to take away a full 30 to give us negative 20. In number 9, we have negative 34 plus 50. So we're starting in the negatives and we're adding 50, so moving to the right. If we have negative 34 and we're adding 50, well, in order to get to 0, we would need to add 34. So if we had negative 34 and added 34, we would get to 0. But that's not the same problem. We have negative 34 and we're adding 50. And 50 is 34 plus 16. So if we have negative 34 plus 34, we'll get to 0. And then from there, we still have to add that extra 16 so that we really add 50. So 0 plus 16 gives us a positive 16. And I know I'm doing each of these problems slightly different. I'm just giving you a couple different ways to think about the problem because not everybody thinks the same. We're all very different. So taking different approaches, one might stick better with a visual learner, whereas one might stick better with somebody who likes to write things down. It just depends on you as the person. So hopefully one of these methods sticks. And remember, you could also rewrite this as 50 plus negative 34, and adding a negative is the same as subtracting a positive. So 50 minus 34. That's easy. We all know that that is 16 because we add 6 to get to 40 and then 10 to get to 50. 50 minus 34 is 16. Let's continue on to number 10, the last one in this section. In number 10, we have 38 plus a negative 5. So this is 38 plus a negative. Remember, subtract that positive. 38 minus 5 equals 33. Or think of it as 38 plus a negative 5. We're going to the left on that number line. So we're moving to the left 5, 38, 38's here, and we're going to the left 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to this point, which would be 37, 36, 35, 34, 33. You started out with $38, you paid $5 for something, you only have $33 left. Hopefully one of those ways sticks, and if it did, go back and try redoing the problems with the method that you feel most comfortable with, or try to come up with something that really sticks for you. Now, let's continue on to the next section, find each difference. Let's start with number 11. In number 11, we have 2 minus a negative 2. Now think about the above examples. When we added a negative, that was the same as subtracting a positive. And when we subtract a negative, that's going to be the same as adding a positive. So 2 minus a negative 2 becomes 2 plus a positive 2. And 2 plus 2 equals 4. You can also think about it as starting in the positives, and then we're taking away, moving to the left. So if we're not moving to the left, we're going to be moving to the right. So 2 minus a negative 2 is 2 plus a positive 2. In number 12, we have negative 1 minus a positive 10. So we're starting in the negatives and we're moving to the left because we're subtracting 10. So we're going further in those negatives. So -1 minus 10, -1 take away 10 will be a -11. And if you need to, think about the number line. We're starting with -1 and moving 10 to the left to get to -11. And number 13, just basic subtraction like we've always done. We have 8 and we're subtracting 7. 8 minus 7, 8 take away 7, starting at 8, moving 7 to the left on the number line gives us a +1. And remember that trick for figuring out whether something was positive or negative? We're starting with a larger positive value and taking away a smaller positive value, so we know that our result is going to be positive. If we were starting with a smaller positive number and taking away a larger one, then we know that we're going to be in the negatives. Taking a look at number 14, we have -8 and we're subtracting a -6. So we're starting in the negatives and we're moving to the left because we're subtracting, but we're subtracting a negative. So we're not moving to the left, and not moving to the left would be moving to the right. So -8 minus a -6 is -8 plus a +6. Subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. -8 plus 6, remember we're moving to the right, that's going to be a -2, because this -8, that absolute value is greater than 6, even though -8 is less than 6, or to the left of 6 on the number line, the absolute value of it, the distance from 0, is 8, where this distance from 0 is 6. So because -8 is further away from 0, our number is going to be negative. So again, at number 14, our solution is -2. Moving on to the second page, we'll look at number 15. 11 minus 4, 11 take away 4, that's just going to be a +7. Now in number 16, we're starting with a +48 and we're subtracting a negative. And remember, subtracting a negative, we're not moving to the left. Subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. So 48 minus -31 is 48 plus 31. And that's going to give us a +79. Moving on to number 17, we have 18 minus 41. 18 take away 41. Now we're starting with +18, but we're taking away or moving to the left 41. So you can think of this as 18 plus a -41, or just simply 18 minus 41. So our negative number, or the number that we're using moving to the left, is a greater distance from 0 than 18 is. So we know that we're going to be negative. So our resulting number is going to be negative, and 18 minus 41, that's a little difficult to do in our heads, but let's break it down. If we have 18 and we subtract 18, we'll get to 0, right? 18 minus 18 is 0, but we're not subtracting 18, we're subtracting 41. So subtracting 18, in order to subtract 41, 18 plus what equals 41? That's going to be 23. But remember, we don't have a +41, we have a -41. So if we take away 18 and then take away 23, that's the same as taking away 41. 18 minus 18 is 0, but then we're still subtracting 23. So 18 minus 41 equals a -23. And sometimes it's easier to think about going to 0 first and then figuring out what was left of the number you were subtracting, or if you were adding. Or, like we did above, you can think about doing the opposite. As opposed to 18 minus 41, do 41 minus 18, and then take the negative of that number. 41 minus 18 is 23, negative 23 would be 18 minus 41. In number 18, we have negative 38 minus 30. So we're starting in the negatives and going further into the negatives. Negative 38 minus 30 is going to be negative 68. Again, if working with negatives is a struggle, think about doing this positively. So as opposed to negative 38 and taking away 30, we'll have a positive 38 and we'll add 30. 38 plus 30 is 68. But remember, we did the opposite of what we were told, so our resulting number has to be the opposite of what we got. So negative 38 minus 30, if we think of it as 38 plus 30, that's a positive 68, but doing the opposite, flipping the sign on 68, we'll get negative. So negative 68. In number 19, we have negative 1 minus a negative 3. Minus a negative is the same as adding a positive. So we can write this as negative 1 plus 3. Negative 1 plus 3. The 3 is a greater distance away from 0 than 1 is, or negative 1 is. Therefore, we're going to result in a positive number. Negative 1 plus 3 will be a positive 2. And again, we could have just rewrote this as 3 plus negative 1 because addition is commutative, and 3 plus a negative is the same as subtracting a positive. Just as subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive, adding a negative is the same as subtracting a positive. So we'll have 3 minus 1, which equals 2. So 2 is our solution in number 19. In number 20, right away you should see that we're subtracting a negative, so think of that as adding a positive. Negative 1 minus a negative 40 is negative 1 plus a positive 40. Negative 1 plus 40 is going to equal a positive 39. But if you want to think about this, we can rewrite it as 40 plus a negative 1. And remember, when we add a negative, we're moving to the left, which is the same as subtracting on the number line. So 40 minus 1. That is indeed 39. Now, let's move on to our last and final section where we just evaluate each expression. We're going to be adding numbers or subtracting numbers. Adding and subtracting integers. Here we go. In number 21, we have negative 10 minus 47. Starting in the negatives and continuing to move further into the negatives. Negative 10 minus 47 is going to be a negative 57. And again, if you need to think about this in a different way, do the opposite of each. As opposed to doing negative 10 minus 47, do positive 10 plus 47, which gives you 57, and then take the opposite of that answer, meaning flip the signs. So do, as opposed to positive 57, negative 57. Because just as 10 plus 47 equals positive 57, negative 10 minus 47, or negative 10 plus negative 47, equals a negative 57. 22, we have negative 29 minus 29. We're going further into those negatives again. You can think about this also as negative 29 plus negative 29, because adding a negative is the same as subtracting a positive. So negative 29 minus 29 more is going to be negative 58. And again, you can think of this as negative 29 plus negative 29, because adding a negative is the same as subtracting a positive. Just another way to think about this problem, but you don't necessarily have to think about it this way. Let your brain work the way it wants to work. Don't force yourself and conform yourself to one way of thinking. For number 23, we have 13 plus negative 29. Remember, adding a negative is the same as subtracting the positive. So in number 23, we could rewrite this as 13 minus 29. And right away, we see that negative 29 is a greater distance away from 0 on the number line than 13. So we're going to wind up with a negative number. One way I like to think about it is negative 29. If we subtracted 13 from 13, we would get to 0. But we're not subtracting 13, or we're not adding a negative 13, we're adding a negative 29. So after I subtract 13, I still need to continue to subtract to be able to subtract or add that full negative number. So 13 plus negative 29 is going to be 13 minus 16, because 13 plus 16 is 29, but I'm dealing with negatives. So 13 minus 29 will give me a negative 16. Or again, you could think about this as doing the opposite. So as opposed to taking 13 and adding a negative 29, I'll take a negative 13 and add a positive 29. But remember, I did the opposite, so I can't forget that I'm going to flip my sign of what's inside. So negative 13 plus 29 is the same as 29 minus 13. And remember, I flipped that sign because I did the opposite. 29 minus 13 we know is a positive 16, so as opposed to a positive 16, we have a negative 16. And you can see that if I were to redistribute that negative 13 is positive 13, and negative of a positive 29 is a negative 29. So I would have 13 plus negative 29, just like my original problem. In number 24, 38 plus 22, starting in the positives, continuing into the positives. 38 plus 22 is going to result in a positive 60. So 60 is our solution in number 24. In number 25, we have negative 32, and we're going further into the negatives because we're subtracting a positive 44. We could also think about this, if we wanted to, as a negative 32 plus a negative 44. Because adding a negative is the same as subtracting a positive. Negative 32 plus negative 44, we're adding two negatives together, so we know we're going further into the negatives. That's going to be a negative 76. Now let's move on to number 26. And number 26, negative 12 plus negative 11. We're starting the negatives, moving further into those negatives. 12 plus 11 is going to be 23, but remember, we're dealing with negatives, so that's a negative 23. And 27, as opposed to adding or subtracting two numbers, we now have 3. Remember, addition is commutative, so the way in which we add doesn't matter. So we can do 2 plus 15 and then add 4. We could do 15 plus 4 and then add 2. Or we could do 2 plus 4 and then add 15. I like to move left to right. So let's do 2 plus 15. 2 plus 15, well, that's going to be 17. Because we have a positive number and we're adding a positive number, we're going further into the positives. So 17, and then we still have to add 4. And 17 plus a positive 4 is going to give us a positive 21. So 21 is our solution in number 27. And just to show you that we could have added 15 and 4 first, if we add 15 to 4, we get 19. So then we'd have 2 plus 19, which is also equivalent to 21. Or if we added 4 plus 2, That's going to be 6, and 6 plus 15 is also 21. Let's move on to number 28. For number 28, we have 6 plus a negative 13 plus a positive 5. Again, addition's commutative, and the way in which we add doesn't matter. So I'll start left to right. 16 plus a negative 13, that's like 16 minus 13. Because we're adding a negative, we're moving to the left on that number line. So 16 plus a negative 13 is going to be a positive 3. And I knew that was going to be positive because 16 is a greater distance away from 0 than negative 13, and 16 is positive. Now all we have to do is add 5. 3 plus 5 is going to give us 8. So 8 is our solution in number 28. But let's add in a different manner. Let's add 16 and 5 first, and then add that negative 13, or take away, subtract a positive 13. 16 plus 5 is going to give us 21. And then when we add 21 with negative 13, that's the same as 21 minus 13, which is still a positive 8. Or let's add negative 13 to 5 first. If we take negative 13 and add that to a positive 5, that's like 5 minus 13. Remember, this negative 13 is a greater distance away from 0 on the number line than 5, so our number is going to be negative. Negative 13 plus 5 is going to give us a negative 8. But remember, we still have to add 16. And adding that positive 16 to negative 8 will give us a positive 8, because this is the same as 16 minus 8. Negative 8 plus 16 is the same as 16 minus 8, and that also gives us 8. So there's not one way to do these problems. You can add in many different orders. Let's move on to number 29. In number 29, we're subtracting. Now subtracting, I think, is a little trickier than adding because we're taking away that number, so we need to keep track of that. So if we do 2 minus a negative, that would be like 2 plus a positive 9. And then we're still subtracting 8 from that. Now, we can do 9 minus 8 first, or we can do 2 plus 9 first. It doesn't matter which order. We could also do 2 minus 8 first. We just have to remember that this 8 is indeed subtracted. So let me show you a couple of different ways to do this. If we do 2 plus 9 first, we know that 2 plus 9 is going to give us a positive 11. And then we have to subtract 8, and that will give us a positive 3. Another way we could do this is to do 9 minus 8 first. We know that 9 minus 8 is a positive 1. So then we'd have 2 plus 1, which also gives us 3. Or we could have done 2 minus 8, which is a negative 6, and negative 6 plus 9 is also a positive 3. And again, that was doing 2 minus 8, which gives us negative 6. Negative 6 plus 9 is also a positive 3. So 3 is our solution in number 29. And I quickly want to go back to the beginning and talk about attempting to do this problem without recognizing that the 9 is positive. If we do 2 minus a negative 9, if we try to do negative 9 minus 8 first, negative 9 minus 8 would be negative 17. And 2 minus a negative 17 would be 2 plus 17, which does not give us 3. And that's because the sign with this negative 9 should really be positive. And that's why I said subtraction is sometimes a little trickier than addition. Because this 9, since it's subtracted, it's really adding a positive 9. 9 minus 8 is very different than negative 9 minus 8. That's why I like to simplify my problems before starting. So that's just an important note to keep in mind. I like to simplify, and that's why I like to write subtracting negatives as adding the positives. And if you wanted to, you could write this whole problem in terms of addition. Subtracting a positive is the same as adding a negative. Let's move on to number 30. In number 30, we have 10 plus 3 minus a negative 8. So I'm going to rewrite this right away as 10 plus 3 minus a negative is the same as adding a positive. So 3 plus 8. 10 plus 3 is 13. 13 plus 8 is 21. You could have also done 3 plus 8, which is 11, and 11 plus 10 is 21. Or 10 plus 8 is 18, and 18 plus 3 is 21. Either way to go about that will result in the same solution, 21. Now, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. Also, don't forget to subscribe to my channel so that you're updated when I come out with new videos or new posts. And if you feel so inclined to support me further, go to my Patreon page and become a patron and get access to exclusive Patreon content only. So as always, like, subscribe, and share. And if you feel so inclined, support me further.